Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Had a great weekend, and thanks for tuning in for a Tuesday afternoon Nightlight Part 2. One of the points behind this show is not to forget the people who got us to where we are today. When we've had ufologists like Kathleen Martin as a guest, we've gotten to know Betty and Barney Hill. Michael Carter frequently recaps his discussions with Bud Hopkins. How much do we know about people associated with the emergence of the modern study of UFOs? George Adamski is, one person. We have Gerard Aartsen with us today to teach us about George Adamski's controversial UFO research. Gerard has several publications about Adamski, and he has a new book entitled The Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure, Early Evidence and Answers Now Confirmed by Science Philosophers, Activists, and the Military. It's a terrific book, and you can get the books at Amazon, and you can learn more about Gerard by going to his website, the adamskicase.nl, and there's hyphens between the and Adamski. I think the show has many connections to recent shows, and it's a preview of next week's show with Ken Godsword and a super special guest, the Cat Lady, about their new book, Before Roswell. Hi, Gerard. How are you?
Hi, Mark. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing really well. Looking forward to doing an afternoon show. It's fun to do these little change-ups here and there, and then have Barbara laughing at me in the background. But so let's get to know a little bit about George.
About George Adamski.
What's his? He was born in 1891. Let's get a little bit of biographical material on him, and kind of work our way forward over the next hour or so.
Sure. Well, some listeners, hopefully most listeners, but since I started writing and publishing, I found that his name was almost forgotten. Many people still remember him as the first of what we now know as the contactees of the 1950s. Person who came forward with his stories, accounts of his contacts with visitors from space. And like you said, he was born in 1891 in what is now Poland. Emigrated to the United States with his mother and father and his elder sister, or just a younger sister. I'm not quite sure if she was a year older or a year younger, Lena. And they arrived, if I remember correctly, around 1895, and settled in Dunkirk, New York. George led a rather, humble life. Their family, like many other immigrant families, had to start from scratch. And he worked alongside his father in the locomotive factory in Dunkirk before going into the army. And he served in Columbus, New Mexico, during the Mexican troubles, and he was even captured during the raid on Columbus, New Mexico by Pancho Villa, but miraculously released again. He was among a group who were supposed to be executed just when Pancho Villa himself arrived and told his men to release the U.S. soldiers. But before that, as a youth, as a child, in fact, the story goes that he was taken to Tibet for private education, private tuition. I personally believe that happened on a number of occasions. How he went there, I doubt that he went there, by boat and train, or what had you in those days. Certainly no trains to Tibet from Bombay or Calcutta in India. So I leave that to the imagination of the audience. But he was trained there, and he wrote a book for a long time. It was thought that it was his first publication, titled "Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East," and that gives a beautiful, concise summary, I would say, of the teachings that he received there, and they are very, very close to what I have come to know as the teachings of the ageless wisdom that have come to us through the likes of Madame Blavatsky in the late 19th century, and later elaborated on by Alice Ann Bailey and Benjamin Graham and others in the 20th century. So he was active. Adamski was active early on. Before he started teaching as a metaphysics teacher, he worked as a house painter and did several other menial jobs. He said he had a business going, I assume in house painting, but I'm not sure, before something went wrong, and he was kind of like forced to go into teaching, or at least the opportunity arose for him. He settled in Los Angeles around 1928, and before there was hardly any radio and television, so people in the more remote towns saw it as a kind of entertainment to hear his lectures, his and probably other people's lectures, in his case about metaphysics. And that's where he... Yes?
Oh, I was just going to say, and, we get into the 1930s, and he has a little career in teaching, and he also founds the Royal Order of Tibet in Laguna Beach. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That happened just, he actually founded the Royal Order of Tibet, or at least the name appears in his what turned out to be his first publication, The Invisible Ocean, published in 1932. And that was just before he moved to Laguna Beach, artist colony at the time on the California coast. And at the Royal Order of Tibet, he had students. He had a community of students where he taught the things that he learned in Tibet. And again, very, very closely related to what we now know as the Ageless Wisdom teaching. And this was before he ever spoke, at least about the flying saucers. Although in 1938, one of his benefactors, in fact his first major benefactor, who bought the property where the Royal Order was established in Laguna Beach, bought him a 6-inch telescope, and that was installed already in the gardens of the Royal Order of Tibet's premises. So he had an early interest in space and astronomy. And he continued to teach there until 1940, and that's when he moved to Valley Center, not far from Palomar Mountain. And 4 years later, he moved further up the mountain and established the Palomar Gardens community with his wife and some students. There he and his community, his group, stayed until, I believe, 1960 around. And it was there that he took his he had his first sightings of craft in the sky. He took his first early photographs of craft. He had a box camera that he had attached to his telescope. And managed to take remarkably clear photographs of craft in space against the moon, for instance. And in 1952, November 1952, on a hunch, he with 2 co-workers and 4 friends went out for a picnic into the Coxcomb Mountains in the California desert, and they were hoping to spot spacecraft, and soon enough, around noon that day, they saw a mothership from which emerged several smaller flying saucers, scout craft, and one of them that day landed in the nearby foothills. Adamski went over. His companion stayed by the roadside and saw that he had an exchange with somebody who had stepped out of the flying saucer. And when he returned, he told them about his exchange. And 4 days later, 4 of the people present went to Phoenix, Arizona, and talked to the Phoenix Gazette. And that's when the first report about contact between someone from space and a man from Earth, being George Adamski, was shared with the world in the Phoenix Gazette of the 24th of November. And that's where his fame started. Okay,
so we're only talking 5 years after Roswell. You do get into people like General Marshall, who did believe in UFOs, extraterrestrials. But what was the just general public view of this type of science fiction kind of stories? You have Kenneth Arnold's reporting about the sightings about around Rainier, so we're starting to get a few bigger name people from that time, talking a little bit about this kind of information. How did most people react to this new science fiction-y kind of stories?
Well, the public depended on the media, of course. Mm-hmm. You just mentioned General Marshall, known for the Marshall Plan, of course. That was very significant in getting Europe back on its feet after the Second World War. And General Marshall, I referenced in my book because he stated in private that he was present during a conversation where he was overheard saying that the United States authorities have established that the flying saucers were manned by visitors from outer space. So that is implicit confirmation by an official of the reality of extraterrestrial visitors. But of course, this was in private. And at one point, it was reported in Flying Saucer Review, a UK magazine. And as we all know, since the Roswell crash and the sightings of Kenneth Arnold over Mount Rainier, the authorities publicly did everything to make the public believe that it was all nothing. And first of all, Roswell was a balloon that crashed, a weather balloon. Mm-hmm. Even though initially the army reported that they had found the debris of a crashed saucer, but the next day or the same evening, General Ramey was sent out to the media to explain and reassure the public that no, there was nothing extraterrestrial about it. It was a weather balloon. And since then, but especially when the public became interested through people like George Adamski, very humble people with no social status or anything, no authority in any kind of discipline, scientific or otherwise. George Adamski, Truman Bethram, Daniel Fry, Buck Nelson, and many others in the United States, in South America and Europe. I don't know about Asia, but many in those days reported not only seeing flying saucers, as they were called at the time. We would now call them UFOs or UAPs, but many also reporting having been contacted. So the public, on the one hand, was told, no, it's all science fiction, and of course science fiction shows and movies were very popular at the time. And on the other hand, they had these accounts from people who had, no status about their personal experiences. The message that, without exception, during the 1950s, all these contactees were asked to give to humanity, to share with humanity, was one of major concern for the way things are going here, with the nuclear standoff between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, which put a massive psychological weight on the public around the world, the global population, and humanity as a whole. It was a psychologically stressful time, which lasted well into the 60s and 70s, as we know. And these space visitors asked their human interlocutors to tell the world of the dangers of this approach to resolving conflicts, and to urge us to seek cooperation, international cooperation, to resolve our differences, under which circumstances they would be able to share with us their advanced technology for safer energy power generation, for instance. Because of the nuclear arms race, the authorities, at least we know in the UK and the United States, became concerned about public support for their defense expenditures. So everything was done in their power to discredit these contactees, to the extent, I believe, that even alien abductions and cattle mutilations were staged to make the public confused, to confuse the public and scare the public about potential extraterrestrial visitors. No, they're all a fantasy. It's all science fiction. And yes, you should be scared because they abduct people and they mutilate cattle. So that's the state of affairs in those days.
Okay, well, let's backtrack for a second. You were talking about, there's some debris found at the Roswell crash, and George said he had a magnetic turbine that fell from the sky in 1910 over Marion, Ohio. Okay, so from 1947 to when you find that, like 52, 53, there's some of this in that 5-6 year period. We're starting to see what the modern people would recognize as some of these patterns emerging. So finding this turbine from something that fell in 1910. Okay, we have the Wright brothers making their flight in 1903. There's really not an Air Force or too much other than maybe some kids flying a kite. There really isn't man-made things flying very much in 1910. So
exactly.
What is George seems like he's being at the center of some of these artifacts that are starting to appear after the Roswell crash. So that's kind of of course that's going to draw a lot of attention. People who believe what you're saying, and the detractors, and then his statements and books appearing not long after he comes forward with this magnetic turbine. So he's getting a lot of criticism with statements. So what is going on with George at that time? How's he handling the being like a new kind of celebrity versus a threat to the military-industrial complex?
Well, just to to correct misunderstanding there. It was in January 1952 that he wrote to one of his students that he had a piece of magnetic turbine that was found in 1910. So that was 10 months before his first contact was reported in November 1952. And this wasn't I don't know if he didn't write about it. He didn't publish it. He did have study groups or people visiting him at the Palomar Gardens Cafe, who were, going up the mountain, camping or hiking or taking a look at the Palomar Observatory that had been finished in 1949. So he talked about these things in correspondence with students before he became famous, before he had his first contact in the desert. And he was, like you say, rightfully, he was heavily criticized, and people tried to debunk his stories. And as you look closer into the evidence, then it becomes clear that people are debunking him because either they can't believe that such a simple man would have been privileged, would have had the privilege of, being one of the prominent contactees, or to take the most detailed photographs of flying saucers ever, or to be the mouthpiece for these visitors. And to know more about them apparently than most other people, especially the military who were in the service of the powers that be, the military-industrial complex that was becoming a fact. They were trying to cover things up rather than disclosing or sharing with the public. Many military men and people in governments, diplomats, they knew about the reality, but it wasn't to their benefit that the public would know and believe that reality. So whatever Adamski said, in the 1950s there was people were skeptical, even in the scientific circles and military circles, but they were also more open-minded before it became an all-out disinformation campaign to discredit him and his fellow contactees. But he never swayed from his account and the facts as he knew them. He stood by what he had said from the beginning, and he shared his experiences, incredible as they may have seemed and still seem to many people. But he was, to my mind, he was the bravest of all the contactees, because he just stood by his experiences and did what was asked of him to do, to share his experiences with the world. And other contactees eventually, over the years, after much public ridicule, they buckled and they sometimes withdrew their accounts, or they became self-appointed galactic emissaries, and what have you. They sort of lost their way. But Adamski always remained simple, just serving the public with by sharing his information.
Yeah, and you were just talking about Adamski is just a simple guy. I don't know how much.
Limited formal education.
I don't think he was really seeking the spotlight. He eventually got into it, though. But is there something about George that would have attracted the UFOs that out in the desert, or would given him rides to Venus, that he claims he had. Is there? I was just kind of wondering about his affiliation with religions, studying in Tibet, starting churches in the Laguna Beach area. Was there some kind of trait about him that we're discovering today, there's generational contacts? Is there anything that we can explain why these paranormal activities were kind of centered around him?
Well, to set the record straight, he didn't found churches. He started off with the Royal Order of Tibet. The premises in Laguna Beach was called the Temple of Scientific Philosophy, if I'm not mistaken. But he soon, and that's, I believe, one of the reasons why he left for Palomar Mountain. He soon realized that it's not about organizations and being a leader of an organization. I think what made him so suitable was his open-mindedness, and I think it was his fate. He was trained at a very young age to be this channel of information, to work, to serve as this channel of information. He was not at all, a flawless character or an infallible human being, and he never claimed to be. And many critics and so-called or self-appointed UFO researchers have just dismissed his philosophies and his teachings as a new kind of UFO religion. It's absolute nonsense, especially when you look at it from our current understanding through quantum physics of the reality, the nature of reality, where consciousness is found to be at the foundation of our three-dimensional world. And when you look at his teachings, whether it's from the 1930s in Laguna Beach, in his letters to his students, or in the accounts of his contact with visitors from space and the philosophy that derived from it, it's all it's all along the same lines, and it's not contradictory anywhere. It's always about consciousness as the means, so to speak, through which life manifests, and the evolution of consciousness. And personally, based on research and what I've read in the accounts of people who worked closely with him, there are indications that he was in fact a soul from Venus who incarnated here, especially for this purpose of being the contactee and the foremost contactee of the space visitors in the 1950s, to prepare humanity for the fact that the realization that we are not alone in the universe, that all the planets in our solar system are inhabited, even though our probes and our lunar modules, etc., don't find anything in the carbon-based reality. But present-day science indicates that there are dimensions beyond our three-dimensional carbon-based reality, and it is my personal contention that life may just as well exist, intelligent life forms, at physical levels above the three physical levels that we know and experience. The dense physical, the liquid physical, and the gaseous physical. After all, science of astrophysics says that there's 90% of the universe that it cannot find. They know it must be there in terms of matter, but they can't find it. They can't pinpoint it. So they call it dark matter, dark energy. Mm-hmm. And so that's where, and that's why I believe it's not only an answer to Fermi's paradox. There's so many. The universe is so large. There's so many planets and galaxies. So there must, by way of logic, there must be other intelligences out there. So why haven't we found them? Yeah, that's Fermi's paradox, and to me, that is the answer to that paradox. And Adamski, like you said, writes in his books, especially Flying Saucers Have Landed and Inside the Spaceships, of his contacts coming from planets like Venus and Mars, but also Saturn and Jupiter. With our present-day science, I don't think that is really out of the realm of the possible anymore.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, and what I was going to say, there are suggestions from people who worked closely with him, such as Desmond Leslie, the co-author with whom Adamski published "Flying Saucers Have Landed," that Adamski was a soul from Venus who incarnated here, and also according to the Ace of Wisdom teachings, we incarnate and reincarnate to gradually evolve in consciousness, to reconnect with the source of consciousness, and gradually perfect our bodies, physical, emotional, and mental, to manifest more and more of our divine nature. And so Adamski, I believe, incarnated here for his mission to serve humanity by bringing us this notion of visitors from space, and that there's intelligent life all around us, even in our own solar system.
Okay. So with these claims that he traveled to Venus, and you also say he reincarnated from Venus. Okay, some of this stuff sounds a little out there, but when we look at photos that Adamski's photos that you have published in your some of the comments that he makes in his writings, that we find them being discussed today in more detail. So the point I was making is there's some science is reporting on like the early 50s that we're just discovering now. For example, a photo of a UFO in front of the moon that seems like it has a force field around it. A Department of Defense photo that you put next to it has something similar. It looks like there's like some kind of protective bubble around it. When Wallace Wagner has been a guest with us, we've had some photos on the YouTube archive where some of these medieval paintings have these looks like stars with someone in them driving the craft, and there's kind of like a protective shield that's depicted in these like 14th century paintings. So he's being picking up on things that are being confirmed by modern science. In other words, the fireflies and Van Allen belt. Do you want to talk a little bit about how did someone discover this stuff before it was discovered by the official, scientists?
Exactly. Yeah, and Adamski describes what are now known as the Van Allen belt in his book Inside the Spaceship, because he experienced it and he saw it perhaps on the screens in the ship that he was invited on. The same with the Firefly Effect that the astronauts later experienced in out-of-orbit flights. And I don't know a lot about astronomy or astrophysics, but you're absolutely right. How could he write about these things if he hadn't experienced them or had been in space himself? There's another example that I found and used in the same chapter in my book of dots of light that he photographed near the moon in 1950, and a group of scientists who have been researching, looking at old photos made by George Adamski took photos and photographed dots of light or saucer-shaped figures in front of the moon out in space with a camera attached to his 6-inch telescope. Now, this group of scientists, they went through old photographs taken by the Palomar Observatory Sky Survey program that ran from 1949 until 1958, and they found very similar photographs of groups, we would probably refer to it as formations of light that could not be explained by any other known astrophysical phenomena or photographic phenomena. So Adamski was ahead of the game in so many respects. And the interesting thing is he wrote again to one of his students that he had taken photos, and he said, the Palomar Observatory, I know they also have those photos, because he had good contact with several people who worked there. One was Joseph Johnson, who was the son of his first benefactor in Laguna Beach. And he worked as an astronomer with the Palomar Observatory. Fritz Zwicky, the Swiss astrophysicist, who first posited the idea of dark matter, came to visit Adamski several times at the Palomar Gardens Cafe. So Adamski wrote to his student, I know they photographed the same things I photographed, but of course you can't expect them to share that information because they are working together with the military and they're not free to release these things. So he was ahead of the game in many, many ways.
And yes, speaking of the Palomar Observatory, you write, also it is striking that the Palomar Observatory astronomers noted the glints were not visible half an hour earlier or 6 days later, but as Adamski observed, such information from them cannot be expected because they worked with the military. But there's proof that his photos showed something, and the observatory said, well, okay, yeah, we kind of have to agree with that, but we aren't going to say anything.
Right. Yeah. And these photos I published on the previous pages of that in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's photographic evidence, just as the one that you just mentioned, the saucer-shaped craft with a slight hint of a force field that he photographed also in 1950. And when you compare that with one of the stills from the U.S. Navy videos that were leaked in 2017 through the New York Times, and later confirmed by the Pentagon to be authentic, it's just striking. It's amazing how similar they are. Yeah, but of course, in his day, Adamski, in his day, maybe not in the 1950s because his photos were not so well known yet, and he only shared them with visitors to the cafe. But later on, when they became better known and he published his photos in his books, he was ridiculed. And now we see that they are actually being confirmed from the Pentagon.
Yeah, and
of course, let me clarify. The Pentagon is not saying no, Adamski was right after all. But if you put them next to each other, it's quite clear that Adamski, with his much more primitive equipment, made very similar photographs.
Yeah, and just like the you said the one Department of Defense photo came out in you said 2017. The Firefly statement was 15, just under 20 years prior to people actually going to the moon, and they had that phenomenon happen inside the spacecraft. So it gives us more credence that maybe he really did make these trips. How did he know that 20 years before it would be officially discovered on where is it? The moonshot. Yeah.
Adamski wrote about the Firefly Effect in his book Inside the Spaceships.
Right.
He said it was his first trip in space in February 1953, and it was published in 1955. And the astronauts on Mercury 7 mission, it was John Glenn, they described the same phenomenon in 1962. So that's 9 years after Adamski experienced it.
Okay. I was off a few years, but there it is. So
yeah.
February 62. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think your Kate that example is just something really makes the case that what did he experience? I just find it your information just really pulled me into the story about it. Sounds outrageous, but when he is so accurate with what we would discover later, that you have to wonder, maybe this really did happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's and I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to not forget these people who made contributions, and like you said, maybe his name may be more of a footnote, but let's not forget what George Adamski did, and keep him on the front burner.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
Yeah, it's really intriguing. And there's also cover on your website, and you do have some footnotes in your book about his correspondences with Emma
Martinelli.
Yeah, Emma Martinelli. With all these correspondences with Emma and some of the other people we discussed early in the show, what do all those letters reveal about his convictions, about his experiences?
You see, the letters to Emma Martinelli, I found of extreme interest because they were written between 1950 and 1952. So in 1950, Adamski was obscure. Nobody knew about him. He had left his tenure, so to speak, as a metaphysics teacher in Laguna Beach. He was living a quiet life on Palomar Mountain with his group of students. He did publish. He had a brochure out in 1946, The Possibility of Life on Other Planets. His interest in space and life on other planets was already apparent at that time. In 1949, he wrote the book Pioneers of Space, and that was sold through the Palomar Gardens Cafe, and it did reach people in wider California. And one of those people was Emma Martinelli, and she wrote to him about it with several questions that she had. And to me, it's of interest because it was before he became famous for his contact with people from space and the books that he wrote and the photographs that he took. He did take, during that time of writing these letters corresponding with Miss Martinelli, he did take photographs, but they weren't published yet. And in his letters, and that is the reason why I chose to publish them, also last year, it becomes very clear that his ideas about the nature of reality never changed, and they were also always very profound. And he had early information about spacecraft coming here that was only confirmed later on. He writes about several episodes where craft were spotted and radio reports came out, and I've brought in to publish it in my book as well some clippings about that. So it just shows how interested he was and how well informed he was when to the public, very little was known at the time. So that block of correspondence with Miss Martinelli, I think is of special interest. But then later on, he wrote to many, many people. He received letters from all over the world. And I wish there would be a searchable database or something. And I've been fortunate to find several bunches of correspondence, and some have been published in books. But when he wrote to other authors, and they all show that he's been consistent throughout his life with his teachings, with his views, and he didn't change as some people accused him, moving into the flying saucer business because he thought he could make easy money there. There's nothing like that. He had an early interest in space and visitors from space, and his views never changed on that, and has always been consistent in his descriptions.
Yeah, and if Adamski has been consistent with his descriptions. He had. You do have of the painting that he had commissioned of Warthogon. You do have people like Michael. Michael Carter can show you photos of or samples of the people who had visited him on some of the video shows that he's done. There's what maybe some of the Nordic traits in the Warthogon painting. That's consistent with what we continue to. Some people continue to be eyewitnesses too.
Mm. Yes, and I'm not surprised. Adamski was told, and all the other early contactees were told, that the human form is universal. You find it all over the universe. There are differences, just as there are differences in the human form on our planet. Some people are short, some are very tall, some people are white, and others are black, and every color in between. But and there's different facial features, and so there are differences between the general human form on different planets. But some of them are very, very much like us, like Adamski's contacts from Venus.
Yeah, and speaking of the appearances of the space visitors, there are the couple photos you have on page 54 from an Italian.
Right, yes. Alberto Perego.
Yeah. What? Okay, yeah, there's the human form. There's not, like in the early 50s, you get the portrayal of Martians, like was it Marty the Martian with the antenna and they're green and okay, but when you start dealing with the George's paintings as well as the photographs, we are seeing that the people from other planets are very similar to the human form, and other guests we've had have discussed maybe some of the angels that appear in the Bible that are suddenly there talking with Paul on the road to Damascus, and then that they're suddenly gone. There's no indication that they're that much different looking from from us. They just have the power of just suddenly being there and then disappearing. They give their message and then they disappear. So what do we see about in this photo from Dr. Perego?
Alberto Perego was an Italian consul who became Adamski's main contact. Adamski, because his book Flying Saucers Have Landed and his following book Inside the Spaceships was met with such enthusiasm that they were translated within a few years in many other languages. Actually, not in Italian, as it happens, but it was noted by Dr. Perego, who was instrumental in documenting, collecting everything that he could in terms of publications about newspaper reports and photographs about flying saucers that were sighted. And he published many of his clippings in his books. He published his own books, and also George Adamski's accounts and photos. And Dr. Perego became the main contact for Adamski in Italy, one of the main contacts, in response to the many requests for more information, to questions that people asked from around the world. Adamski set up a network of correspondence, an international network called the Get Acquainted program. And Dr. Perego became the Italian contact for the Get Acquainted program. And it did branches in many different countries, including Africa. Dr. Perego himself, he was interesting because he was also a protagonist in an Italian case of mass contact with extraterrestrial visitors in underground bases in Italy. And as such, he came into possession of photographs of a pilot of a UFO or a flying saucer, which he published in two of his books, and I reproduced two of those photographs in my book to illustrate how much alike, how similar they are in appearance to us. They're a bit grainy, of course, given the circumstance. I don't know exactly where the photographs were taken, if they were taken inside the ship or just outside. They were taken of a pilot of a UFO after it had landed in Italy in 1957. But he gives Dr. Perego gives a nice description, so. Yeah, they're black and white and they're a bit grainy, but they're quite clear.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a fascinating addition to your book. And we couple that with the Orthon painting and George's drawing, and we just are able to piece together more of what was going on at the time. Or like,
right.
George, you needed to eat dinner, and I have something I need to do, but we can go for a few more minutes, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk about it for about another 7 minutes or so. After all of these rare, unique experiences that George Adamski had, what did he learn? What are some messages that we can learn from his experiences?
Interestingly, the message isn't really new. It's the same message that we've been given through the teachers that we know, from religious teachings, Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and who have you, Muhammad. They are not different at all. But what's really what I find really moving is the teaching that he receives, or the philosophy that he receives, and described very eloquently in his book Inside the Spaceships, from his contacts in space, visitors from space, and they urge us to see each other, human beings on this planet, as brothers and sisters. We see each other as a human family, sharing the same planet as our home. We don't have another planet to go to. There's no need, they say, to compete for a living if we work together, if we share the resources that we have on this planet is so bountiful, they say, and even without their technology, we have achieved so much already on our own. If only we would share that, we would eliminate so much suffering. And many people will say, yeah, and indeed that's been told, that's been said so many times. And who's going to fix that? Who's going to bring humanity? How are we going to get everyone to do that? But it's a matter of knowing oneself. It starts with yourself. If you both in the philosophy of his contact and in his own teaching, Adamski expands on what we've known for centuries. Know yourself, and you know all things. If you know yourself, it's also the one of the axioms from the Delphic oracle, the oracle in Delphi, the ancient Greece. We are urged to learn about ourselves, to know ourselves, and that means not your current identity in this incarnation, but who we fundamentally are as human beings, as physical manifestations of a spiritual or divine reality, who all have their individual talents to contribute. Then it really isn't very difficult to come together and to elect parties that, in our name, govern our countries and the world for the betterment of all. And that is, in a nutshell, the message that he was given, and the message that he taught throughout his life.
Okay. That sounds like a good message to end with. You'll be back with Barbara to continue this discussion at the end of May, I think it is. So hopefully, between now and the end of May, people can go to your website or Amazon to order your books. What's all your contact information where they can get a copy of your insightful writings on this enigmatic figure from early ufology?
There's my books and my public appearances on podcasts and other shows and talks can be found on my website, bgapublications.nl. It's in English, but my books can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the major online booksellers. I don't sell books through my website. But it's Amazon and the usual other suspects are the go-to places for my books. I wrote several on George Adamski, but also several on more generally on the early contactees and pointing out the similarities between their experiences and accounts. people can find descriptions of my books either on Amazon or other websites or on my own website.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. They're really good. That's a brief description. So I think we can just kind of wrap there. I really enjoyed this opportunity, Gerard, and we will continue the conversation in about 6 weeks. And we just reviewed the Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure. Really enjoyed it, and appreciate the opportunity to give us insights into who this major UFO or ufologist was, and I'm sure the audience really got a ground of this enigmatic character. So,
well, thank you. I enjoyed it too. I had a great time.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll keep talking about it in about 6 weeks. And thanks again. I know. Enjoy your dinner. I have an appointment I need to keep too. So we will keep talking, and I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. Enjoy the archive as well, and we'll see. You'll see Barbara on a bunch of shows coming out soon, as well as she and Ken go on the lecture circuit to discuss there before Roswell. So thanks again, everybody, and we will talk to you next week. Thanks again. Bye.